People presume that if something is in our presence, that someone somewhere determined that it was safe. People are making presumptions of safety that really shouldn't be made.
There are standards for non-ionizing radiation protection. They are set on the basis of the assumption that there's no adverse health effect to humans unless the radiation is sufficient to cause tissue heating. In other words, it's acting like a microwave oven, and you don't want to bake your brain as you would a potato in your microwave oven. The assumptions behind the standards that exist are simply wrong. They're not set by health professionals, they're set by physicists and engineer types, and they are ignoring the evidence for human health.
You should know that who wrote the standards, which is the Motorola's, the Nokias of the world, the military who have their own interest in all this. They have no interest in lowering the standard. They want to keep it as high as they can.
As we get more information, we find that our standards are too lax. And not having a standard that is protective of human health provides no motivation for the cell phone companies to find ways of allowing us to use wireless communication, but to use it safely. In many cases, we find that the technical people can find ways of utilizing the technology with less exposure if they have a motivation to do so.
We bought this place 2 years ago and spent a year renovating it, and then when we moved in, within a couple of weeks, I started getting terrible headaches, and we thought it had been maybe miswired. So it took us a while to bring in an environmental engineer from the West Coast. So he came and spent 3 days here doing all sorts of research, and he came back and he said it's wired perfectly, but the problem is the cell antennas outside your window and off the roof decks.
In fact, when he spent the night here, and he went inside a tent to get through the night, a electromagnetic wave reflecting tent. And of course, we sleep under tents now.
What's funny is, since we've been complaining and sending them letters, that two of the antennas, they seem to have pointed in a different direction. But there's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 right here on these two sides. Then on the north and west side, there's, I don't know how many more, 10 more.
We have a massive human experiment of people that have been exposed to something that probably is going to result in increased risk of these cancers. And we won't know for another 5 or 10 years how serious this is. In my judgment, the evidence right now is sufficient to say that we should be very cautious, and from a public health perspective, this is a very serious issue.
I hear the American Cancer Society talk about, the fact that, for less than 10 years we have no problem. That's kind of like not kind of missing the big picture. I mean, if you look at smoking, which they should know all about, you look after 10 years among smokers, you do not see a statistical significant increase in lung cancer. Same with asbestos. There's no doubt asbestos is a horrible carcinogen. I mean, it killed many hundreds of thousands of people. Yet, if you look at people who are exposed to asbestos after 10 years, they do not also have a statistically significant increase in mesothelioma. I mean, you have to go out 15, 20 years before you start to see the real impact.
This is also the first time in human history that people have actually had transmitters up against their skulls. It's not a good idea. The human anatomy is not meant to have a transmitter up against its head. Or anywhere else on the anatomy.
The particular concern is the unique vulnerability of children. And the more research that comes out from various studies, particularly the Scandinavian studies, show that children that begin to use cell phones before the age of 20 are about 5 times more likely to go on to develop brain cancer than if they use them after the age of 30. And people that begin to use cell phones between the ages of 20 and 30 are more vulnerable to develop brain cancer than those that use them after 30. There is no reason for a child to be on the phone all the time. There are reasons they shouldn't be, independent of the health concerns. But it is dangerous for children, more dangerous than for adults.
This is a very serious issue of which we don't have the answers, and we're not doing anything about it, not even studying it. In the United States today, there is not one study going on. Zero.
Industry is making the same mistakes the chemical industries have made in the past, which is to continue to deny that the evidence indicates there is a hazard.
The cell phone industry betrayed the American public. I mean, if you go back to the history, and believe me, I lived through this history, in 1993, they made a commitment to the American public to spend $25 billion to do the research to find out whether there was any problem. They never did it. It was a scam. And in that, it took 6 or 7 years for the scam to work itself through, and by the year 2000, when there's supposed to be all these results, there was, they went to the cupboard, and the cupboard was bare.
If you read your science history, unfortunately, that has been the case in many situations, many questions, and many countries, that the industry has put their hands into these issues. The most sort of famous question is, of course, the tobacco scandal.
The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency had the best research laboratory on Earth. It was well-funded. It had top-notch scientists, very curious, very competent people. That agency was almost completely defunded just about the time that the Telecommunications Act was being enacted in America.
We have the outrageous situation where our U.S. Congress passed a law several years ago that prohibits communities from objecting to the placement of a cell phone tower on the basis of concerns for health.
It was 1996 when the Congress of the United States, responding to industry requests, set up a plan to have a nationwide cell transmission system. The Congress assigned to the Federal Communications Commission the responsibility for licensing telecom companies and for trying to keep obstacles out of the way. And so Congress passed a provision that preempts all state and local government and said that if the FCC set up safety regulations, that would govern and nobody else could interfere with it. That was a very sensible thing at the time because it really started the race to get the telecom system operating nationwide. The problem is that it became rigid and began to have adverse consequences.
Companies essentially bought and paid Congress for the votes to pass this act, which they believed had absolute preemption over local zoning and planning regulations, taking local control of the placement of towers out of the hands of the people who are going to live right next to them. The burden should not have to fall on the people, but Congress was bought and paid for, and the telecom companies closed the door on individuals. You're seeing a groundswell of people in America claiming their rights to challenge the failure of the FCC to set those standards.
We have been in touch with lawyers who think we may have a precedent-setting case because of the measurements in our apartment. But again, the question is, where's the proof? Do you have to die of cancer first?
Money involved. For the U.S. government in licensing these microwave spectra, there's a lot of money for the telecommunications companies who every day receive your payment for your cell phone. And that's ongoing revenues. The telecom companies have to get their foot in the door in a small community to put up a cell tower. The lure to get the small community to put up that cell tower is an ongoing revenue from a contract for leasing that space. $2,000, $3,000, $5,000, it's not out of the question to get that every month. What town or what church, what person with property isn't going to take up that offer?
I've counted more than 14 towers or antennas over in that building. I think they get something like $25,000 a tower a year. So you think, you know, it's a huge, huge profit-making situation for them.
The landlords are making thousands of dollars a month on this. The companies are making billions of dollars on this. So there's a lot of money, and the lobbyists are getting paid lots of money to donate to elected officials' campaigns. They can put them anywhere, and the reason they put them there is because they get a better deal from the landlord. Lawsuits, there's almost no way you can win. Companies are having landlords sign 20, 30-year leases, and they won't even let the landlord out. Many landlords I've spoken to, they say, oh, I would never have done that had I known about the potential risks. They can't get out of the contract now because it's a completely one-sided contract. They don't even use attorneys, the landlords, because there's so much money per month that they get, and now they're stuck in this contract.
Because of the preemptive element of the Telecom Act, lawyers who raise challenges in federal court to these towers and their placement, their specific placement, have to look for a handle that may assail the Telecom Act's preemptive provision. Ironic, isn't it, that we have to raise the issue of the safety of birds, but I've often said birds don't have lobbyists. And it may have left the very loophole it requires to get us to a high court to hear this issue. We don't believe that we are preempted to raise the issue of human health when it comes to the failure of the FCC to set those non-thermal effect standards. And that's the point that we raise time after time in these cases in federal court.
We need to look at things that to get around the fact that we can't look at health, which is a primary concern here. Others are legitimate concerns also, but health is the major concern, and we can't touch it because the federal government is protecting this multi-billion-dollar industry.
September 4, 2008, the European Parliament voted strongly in favor to have a general overhaul of these exposure limits, and they said they were actually obsolete. They need to be strongly reduced.
It's a global problem. It perhaps is even a greater problem in some developing countries because many developing countries don't have landlines. It's just too expensive and difficult in the era of easy use of cell phones.
Where they put antennas, after about 6-7 years, they started to get cancer cases near the antennas. Many cases just where the antennas were.
حالات الموت الغريبة من نوعها والكثير اللي كانت في شهر نوفمبر 1999. كان في هنا حالات موت نتيجة أمراض السرطان في شهر 1 15 واحد توفوا سرطان منهن حياة أخوي.
We took the places of the antennas and put them on a map. And we took all the cases of cancer in last 7 years and put them also on a map. And we got a thrilling picture of cases of cancer near the antennas. And when you see that cancer cases are just near the antennas, you can see the association.
احنا توجهنا في مكاتب للكنيست، للجان في الكنيست، للوزارات، للشركات الهوائيات، توجهنا لهم ان يلاقوا حل لمشكلة الإشعاع اللي عم تطلع من هاي الانتنات وما كانش في تجاوب منهم بتاتا.
Nowadays, Sleman is on a new mission to locate hidden antennas in the village.
الأجهزة اللي موجودة معنا احنا بنلقط انه في إشعاع موجود في المنطقة ابتداء من هاي المنطقة من هون ناحية البيت هذاك اللي موجود قبالنا خزان المي، بعدين هناك تحت هذا الخزان تحت هاي البيوت الإشعاع بيوقف، وبعدين لما بنطلع منه للغرب بيرجع الإشعاع وبيبين على الأجهزة الموجودة معنا. احنا كل ما عم نقرب على البيت الإشعاع بيعلى أكثر، عم بيقوى، وهذا بدل إنه البيت فيه إشعاع، يعني فيه مصدر للإشعاع اللي عم بيطلع هو سببه الأنتينا. كمان المخشير عند زميل كمان نفس الشيء صار 1.2. كل ما بنقرب وبنطلع على سوى البيت مثلا بنلاقي إنه الأنتينا عم تشتغل في قوة. احنا بنشك في إنسان معين في هاي الحارة إنه هو عنده الأنتينا لأنه الأجهزة بتدل. احنا طبعا توجهنا له رايحين نتوجه له كمان في المستقبل. في كثير ناس اللي بيشتغلوا معنا في هذا الموضوع انه يزيح ويزيل الانتينا الموجوده عنده. انه هو ما بيسمح لنا نفوت على جميع الغرف. البيت مكون من 4 طبقات، يعني ما فينا احنا نفوت على كل غرفه وما فيش عندنا صلاحيه، والقانون مش في ايدنا نفوت على كل غرفه. اما احنا متاكدين انه في انتينا موجوده عنده مخبأة. الشهرين 3 قدرنا ننزل قبل تشغيلها محطه اللي كانت بيحطوها بين عسفيه وودادي، ووصلنا الخبر ورحنا لصاحب البيت. اما لما فتنا على الدار لجوا وشفنا وين كانوا بدهم يحطوا الاجهزه قبال غرف النوم تبع اطفاله. هو يمكن ما فكر انه اطفاله يمرضوا، بس انا متاكد انه طمع في ال 1500 او ال 2000 دولار اللي كانوا بده يدفعوهم. والشركات عم تستغل الوضع المادي المزري اللي احنا موجودين فيه مشان يقدموا مصالحنا الخاصه.
In my judgment, we are sitting on a ticking bomb, and we're not doing what we should do to advise people on ways that they can reduce their exposure, to tell them that they should reduce their exposure, that they should just be aware of this threat. You know, I sincerely hope it's not as bad as I think it is. But my job as a public health official is to do what I can to prevent disease, not wait till people develop their brain tumor and then find ways of treating it. And I think that the evidence at present calls for an active, urgent message to the public, to the politicians, to the companies, that we must find ways of reducing exposure to radio frequency fields.
Everybody needs this mobile so much. It's such a beloved thing. It's so useful. I used to say it saved so many people's lives in earthquakes and in crimes and wherever. So it saves so many lives. And so far, we don't know how many lives were taken.